Fast enough for the sheriff. I want it like you. Come on, guys, let's go, let's find her. But the reality is I also know that sometimes things take time.
At 1:47 a.m., a doorbell camera outside a home near Tucson goes offline. 1 minute. It watches the porch. The next, the feed stops. In the dark, a single break in a routine can look small. A glitch, a dropped signal, a normal tech failure. But what happens next makes that 1:47 timestamp feel like a warning, because by 2:28 a.m., a pacemaker app tied to an iPhone disconnects. Another signal cuts out. Another clock stops talking. And by the time family arrives later that morning, an 84-year-old woman is gone. Nancy Guthrie disappears from her own bedroom, and the first public facts point to a targeted, deliberate act, not a confused wandering, not a simple missing person case. Authorities say they believe she was taken against her will. They say they find blood evidence inside the home. They later release video showing a masked person tampering with the doorbell camera. And then the case does what the most unsettling cases always do. It opens with proof, then collapses into silence. Before we go deeper, support true crime investigator Alex by liking this video and subscribing. You help more people see the facts, the timeline, and the unanswered questions in cases like this. Now go back to the first clock. The night stretches across the hours where most homes feel safest. The hours when lights are out, doors are locked, and the neighborhood is still. Nancy is last believed to be home that night. Then the early morning turns into a narrow corridor of timestamps that investigators treat like a spine. At 1:47 a.m., the doorbell camera disconnects. At 2:12 a.m., the camera software detects a person, but no video is available. At 2:28 a.m., the pacemaker app disconnects from the paired phone. Those 3 points form a sequence that feels cold because it does not leave room for comfort. It suggests presence. It suggests timing. It suggests someone entered the orbit of that home, stayed long enough to do something, and left before daylight. Then the second part of the timeline lands with a different kind of force because it is normal human behavior, the kind you can picture without trying. At 11:56 a.m., relatives arrive. They find Nancy missing. At 12:03 p.m., someone calls 911. In many cases, that gap between the last quiet hour and the first alarm is where hope lives. People want to believe there is a simple explanation, a misunderstanding, a door left open, a phone misplaced, a short walk that turned into confusion. But in this case, authorities say they believe she was taken against her will. They point to blood evidence at the home. They later release video of a masked person tampering with the camera. Those details push the story into a different category fast. This is not a case built on rumor alone. It is built on signals, digital disconnections, and a crime scene that does not fit an innocent absence. That is why the 41 minutes between 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m. matters so much. It becomes the backbone of the story. It becomes the gap where the abduction is believed to unfold. And it becomes the window that creates the central question. How does someone remove an elderly woman from her own home during that tight window and leave behind so little public clarity? Start with the clean window, because this is where the documentary tension needs to lock in. The doorbell camera disconnect is not described publicly as a normal outage that happened later in the day. It lines up with the hours when the house is expected to be asleep. Then the system flags a person at 2:12 a.m. Yet there is no video available. That combination is brutal for investigators and terrifying for families. A sensor says, "Someone is there." A camera says, "You cannot see it." And then the pacemaker app disconnects at 2:28 a.m., which anchors the window even more. It is a second device event that happens in the same night corridor. Those facts do not explain motive, but they do explain structure. They tell you the case begins with a controlled sequence of interruptions, and interruptions raise two kinds of questions at once. The first is technical. Was the doorbell camera disconnected by interference? Was it physically tampered with? Was it a power issue? Was it a system failure that happened at the worst possible time? Authorities later release video that shows a masked person tampering with a doorbell camera, and that fact changes the tone. It pushes the story away from accident and toward intent. The second question is human. Who goes to an occupied home in the middle of the night? Who approaches a front door where a camera is mounted? Who touches the camera on purpose, knowing it risks leaving evidence? Who does it anyway? Because that move suggests the offender understood the camera mattered, understood the camera could identify them, and took steps to reduce what it captured. But this case refuses to give the public a simple answer after that. Instead, it opens a door into a deeper uncertainty. If the camera is interfered with at 1:40 to 7 a.m., why does the software detect a person at 2:12 a.m. with no video? If there is a person detection, where is the matching footage? Is it missing because it never recorded? Is it missing because it was deleted? Is it missing because the camera was partly functional but not saving clips? Is it missing because of a technical setting investigators have not discussed publicly? The public timeline gives you the sharp edges, then leaves you inside the dark space between them. And then, after Nancy is discovered missing, the story takes its next turn. Authorities say they find blood evidence at the home. That is a simple statement with a heavy weight. Blood evidence suggests injury. Blood evidence suggests force. Blood evidence suggests a moment of violence, even if the public does not know how much, when or where in the home it was found. Because the details matter, and those details are not fully public, so the script has to handle that responsibly. You do not fill in what is not confirmed. You do not paint an injury you cannot prove. You do not turn a fact into a graphic scene. You let the fact remain what it is, and you let the audience feel what it implies. An 84-year-old woman is missing, and blood evidence is present in her home. That alone is enough to turn a neighborhood into a crime scene and a family into a waiting room. Then comes the offender's presence, the part that makes the case feel closer, because video footage is the closest thing the public has to direct contact with the suspect. Authorities release video that shows a masked person tampering with the camera. A mask does two things at once. It blocks identity, and it signals preparation. Masks do not prove guilt on their own. But in a case where a person is missing, and officials say she was taken against her will, a masked figure tampering with a camera becomes a symbol of control. It shows intent to hide. It shows a willingness to approach an occupied home. It shows contact with the property during the critical window. But even with that, the public does not get a name, an arrest, or a clean narrative. And that gap is where the case becomes addictive to watch, because your brain starts begging for resolution. Who is the masked figure? How did they know where to go? How did they get inside? How did they leave without the neighborhood stopping them? What vehicle did they use? Did anyone see anything? Did anyone hear anything? Did any camera in the area capture the exit? And if the camera was tampered with, what else was touched? Doors, locks, windows, any object in the home, any surface, anything that can hold transfer evidence. At this stage, investigators do what they always do when they face a tight time window and a suspected abduction. They build the case outward. They begin at the home. They examine the immediate environment. They look for points of entry and exit. They look for physical evidence. They look for digital traces. They look for witnesses. They look for patterns that can survive, even when faces are hidden. But the public does not see most of that work in real time. The public sees headlines, short updates, and a few hard facts. And then the case enters its next act, the ransom noise. In the days after Nancy disappears, ransom messages appear. The family says they responded to early ransom messages they believed were real. A $1 million reward is offered, and the ransom angle pulls the case into a new emotional lane, because ransom changes what people think they are watching. If this is ransom, people expect contact. People expect demands. People expect proof. People expect a negotiation story. They expect the missing person to become a bargaining chip. But this case does not deliver that clean pattern in public. Instead, it adds another layer of uncertainty. Which messages were tied to the abductor, if any? Which were scammers, exploiting a public case? What did investigators confirm? What did they dismiss? What did they trace? Those questions matter, because ransom messages can do damage even when they are fake. They can drain time. They can drain hope. They can drain focus. They can push families to chase shadows, while the real offender stays quiet. And then the case hits one of its most important documented turning points. The kind that looks like progress until it becomes disappointment. Gloves are recovered. They resemble gloves seen in the video. For a moment, it feels like a link, a physical object that might connect the masked figure to a real person. The gloves are examined, and the public learns the DNA path does not identify a suspect through coding. Then another blow lands. The gloves are later tied to a local worker, and that person is cleared. This is the kind of moment that investigators know too well. A lead that feels strong collapses under verification. A clue that looks like a break turns into a dead end. And when that happens, the public frustration grows because viewers want the story to behave like television. They want the glove to be the smoking gun. They want the test to produce a match. They want an arrest before the episode ends. But real investigations often move in reverse. They clear, they eliminate, they narrow, they remove false links. They learn what the evidence does not say. And in cases like this, learning what the evidence does not say is still progress, even if it feels like loss. Because clearing a wrong suspect is part of protecting the real case. It keeps the file clean. It keeps defamation risk low. It keeps the investigation focused. It also shows something else. Officials are not relying on one piece of evidence alone. They are building a structure. And that structure often remains invisible until the day charges are filed. If charges are filed, then the case enters the long silence, the phase that tests families and makes the public restless. Updates slow. Search efforts continue, but details are limited. No arrest is announced. Nancy is not found. And the longer the case remains open without a clear resolution, the more the story becomes about the gap between what investigators know and what they can say. Because there is a reason authorities hold back details in cases like this. They protect witness integrity. They protect evidence. They protect strategy. They avoid tipping off the offender. They avoid feeding false confessions. They avoid letting someone tailor an alibi to public facts. So the silence does not always mean the work stopped. Sometimes silence means consolidation. Sometimes it means the case is being prepared for the level of scrutiny that comes with prosecution. Because once an arrest happens, every timestamp will be challenged. Every clip will be slowed. Every statement will be compared against records. Every lab step will be examined. Every timeline gap will be attacked. Investigators know that, and they do not rush if the case is not ready. But the public lives in a different reality. The public lives in the wait, and the wait brings the most dangerous fuel of all, speculation. So the script has to do something disciplined here. It has to keep the audience engaged without turning into accusation. It has to build tension from confirmed facts, and from the questions those facts raise, not from naming people. So return to the facts that create the strongest pressure. A doorbell camera disconnect at 1:40 to 7 a.m. A person detection at 2:12 a.m. with no video. A pacemaker app disconnect at 2:28 a.m. blood evidence at the home. A masked person tampering with the camera. Ransom messages that the family says they believed were real early on. A $1 million reward. Gloves that resemble those seen in the video. Then a cleared worker. Then no CODIS match to identify a suspect. No arrest announced in the reporting that covers early April 2026. That is already a high-tension framework because it contains control, intrusion, and silence. Now, bring the timeline back and tighten it like a knot. Picture the logic investigators have to follow. If the camera disconnect happens at 1:47 a.m., it suggests the critical activity is beginning. If a person is detected at 2:12 a.m., it suggests movement is occurring on or near the property during the window. If the pacemaker app disconnects at 2:28 a.m., It suggests another change in the environment or devices at a time that fits the suspected abduction window. Then by late morning, the home is discovered in a state that triggers an urgent response. This is a narrow corridor with a missing person at the center. And it raises a brutal retention question you place right here, because it keeps the viewer locked in. If those timestamps are the spine, what happened inside the home between them? Was Nancy taken immediately after 1:47 a.m. or later? If the person detection is at 2:12 a.m., does that mean the offender is still on the property then? Or does it mean a system event triggered after the main act? And why is there no video? Was there a gap in recording? Was the camera unable to save? Was the storage disconnected? Was it a known weakness in the system? Authorities have not given the public a full technical explanation in the reporting cited for this outline, which is why the question remains open. Then the next retention question is even more personal. How do you remove a person from a home without drawing attention? Did the offender carry her? Did they use a wheelchair? Did they lead her out? Did they use a vehicle close to the home? Did they park far away? Were their neighbors awake? Were their dogs barking? Did any camera on nearby streets capture a vehicle leaving? The public does not have confirmed answers to those details, so you do not invent them. You keep the questions alive, and you keep moving forward. Now the story turns toward motive lanes, but you label them clearly as working theories based on public facts. The first lane is a targeted abduction. This lane is supported by several public elements. A masked figure tampers with a camera. The timeline suggests planning around late-night hours. Authorities say she was taken against her will. Blood evidence exists at the home. Those points fit an offender who expects resistance, expects risk, and still acts. But even in this lane, a core question stays unresolved. If the abduction was targeted for what? For money? For leverage? For control? For something personal? Nothing in the confirmed public facts forces one motive over another, so you do not choose one. You let the lane exist as a structure, not a claim. The second lane is ransom-driven planning. This lane exists because ransom messages appear, and the family says they responded to early messages they believed were real. A large reward is offered. Those facts invite a ransom narrative, but ransom cases often involve ongoing communication, and the public reporting around this case does not deliver a clean, steady ransom exchange story. So the lane remains uncertain. It raises more questions than it answers. Were the messages authentic? Were they tied to the abductor? Were they opportunistic scammers reacting to media coverage? Did investigators trace the origin? Did they confirm a link? The public does not have full answers, and the script has to respect that. The third lane is opportunistic crime. This lane is always present because investigators have to consider it early. But the publicly confirmed elements, especially the masked tampering and the tight timing, can make pure opportunity feel less satisfying as an explanation. Still, you do not dismiss it as impossible. You keep it as a lane, and you treat it as what it is, a possibility the public cannot eliminate based on what is known. Now bring the viewer into the act structure without labeling it like a chapter list. Act 1 is the clean window. Act 2 is the offender appearing without identity. Act 3 is ransom noise. Act 4 is the evidence thread that collapses. Act 5 is the long silence. And the final act is where you show the real cost. Because beyond the cameras and timestamps, a family is trapped inside the same question every day. In early April 2026, the case remains unresolved in public reporting. Savannah Guthrie returns to air while her mother's abduction remains open. A detail that lands hard because it shows life moving forward while the case stays stuck. That contrast is part of why viewers cannot look away. The world keeps turning. Broadcasts continue. Days pass. But the core truth stays the same. An elderly woman is missing. A masked person was captured tampering with a camera. Blood evidence exists. Authorities believe she was taken against her will, and no arrest is announced in the reporting covered by the outline. Now place the next strategic call to action right in the middle, where the story is tightest and the questions are stacking. If you want clear timelines and fact-only breakdowns in cases like this, like the video and subscribe to True Crime Investigator Alex, your support keeps these cases visible when silence starts to take over. Now go deeper into the silence, because silence is where mistakes happen, and where investigators often look for patterns the public never sees. When a case becomes high-profile, two things happen at once. Some people step forward with real tips. Other people step forward with noise. Scammers send messages. False leads flood in. Rumors spread. And investigators have to separate signal from chaos, while protecting the family from exploitation. This is where a lot of cases break down. Not because the truth is impossible, but because time becomes an enemy. Evidence fades. Memories shift. Cameras overwrite. Digital logs get lost. People who saw something small convinced themselves it did not matter. So the case depends on what was collected early. The home as a crime scene, any physical traces, any device data, any preserved clips, any verified communications, any confirmed sightings. And yet, even in that, the public sees only fragments. So return again to the key moment that shows how fragile breakthroughs are. The gloves. They resemble the gloves seen in the video. They sound like a direct link, but they do not produce a suspect match in Cody's. Then they are tied to a local worker who is cleared. This moment matters for two reasons. First, it proves investigators are checking evidence and eliminating possibilities, rather than forcing a narrative. Second, it shows the suspect captured on video may not have left behind the obvious, easy-to-solve evidence the public wants to see. Or, if they did, the public does not yet know it. And that leads to another retention question. What other evidence exists that has not been described publicly? Because blood evidence is one public statement. But blood evidence also implies testing. Testing implies lab work. Lab work implies results. If those results exist, the public does not see them, and that is normal. Authorities do not owe the public every lab detail during an active case, but in the absence of that detail, the viewer's mind will drift toward speculation. So pull it back, anchor it, use the known spine, use the known video, use the known digital timestamps, use the known statements, and keep the script disciplined. Now turn the pressure toward the offender without naming anyone, because the offender, whoever they are, took risks. They approached a home with a doorbell camera. They tampered with it while it was mounted and exposed. They operated during a narrow time window that left a clear corridor of timestamps. Even if identity is hidden, timing becomes a signature. The camera disconnect at 1:47 a.m. becomes a line in the sand. The person detection at 2:12 a.m. becomes a second line. The pacemaker app disconnect at 2:28 a.m. becomes a third. If the offender hoped the night would erase them, these digital markers do the opposite. They turn the night into a measured map. They do not identify a face, but they mark movement in time. And time is harder to argue with than memory. Then place the final turning point, the moment the viewer needs to feel the stakes, not as entertainment, but as a living case. No arrest is announced in the coverage referenced for this outline. By early April 2026, Nancy is still missing, and every day after the abduction becomes a choice point for the offender to stay quiet, blend in, hope the case cools, hope the public moves on, hope investigators hit dead ends. But this is the part most offenders misunderstand. Some investigations go quiet in public because they get louder in private. Quiet can mean detectives are building the kind of case that does not rely on one dramatic clue. Quiet can mean they are assembling a chain. Quiet can mean they are verifying. Quiet can mean they are waiting for one more piece that locks it together. And while the public waits for a headline, the case keeps living behind closed doors through warrants, lab work, interviews, and analysis that does not show up on a nightly update. So end with the questions that still matter most, and keep them rooted in confirmed facts. If the camera disconnected at 1:47 a.m., what exactly caused it? If a person was detected at 2:12 a.m., why is there no video? If the pacemaker app disconnected at 2:28 a.m., what was happening in that moment? What does the blood evidence tell investigators about force, timing, and the path through the home. Who is the masked figure in the released video? And what else did they touch? Were the ransom messages tied to the abductor, or were they opportunistic noise that complicated the search? If gloves resembling those in the video led to a cleared worker, what other physical or digital evidence remains that could identify the true offender? And the biggest question, the one every family member wakes up to, where is Nancy Guthrie? If you want this case to stay visible, like the video and subscribe to True Crime Investigator Alex. Every subscription tells the algorithm you want fact-based true crime coverage, and it helps keep missing victims from fading into the background.